and welcome to the Kink Perspective. My name's Chris. I'm a psychotherapist and consultant. On today's show, I'm going to actually be, pardon me, I'm going to be revisiting a topic that I actually talked about in season 1, but often you see a lot of these subjects kind of pop up around, come up time and time again. It seems to be kind of a circular discussions inside of the lifestyle. More so you can kind of look at it that as, new people come in, the ranks kind of replenish, that some of their concerns or some of their behaviors are carried out all over again, and then the discussions need to take place. What am I talking about? Well, today I want to discuss substance abuse, whether it's some type of drug, whether regardless if it's prescription or not, illicit, or even alcohol. Using substances while we play, more so. The fact that the role that plays on our consent, how that can affect us, the challenges, the risks that we're elevating, all of these things that we're kind of getting involved in once we're doing these things inside of the lifestyle. Now, the discussion recently came up that kind of prompted this for me was I'm starting to notice that there are some dungeons in certain parts of the world that have bars that are inside of their clubs. Or some people have been writing various posts. I saw one on Instagram, how somebody was talking about they did some ecstasy basically before they went to a night of scening inside of their local club, and how that all kind of developed and worked out, and how that seemed to have elevated their play while made them feel more euphoric. The problem is when you introduce some of these things inside of the lifestyle is that we have an issue with consent. We have an issue with understanding risk. Our inhibitions are temporarily lowered, and our temporal regions we're not able to process in the same way. Things that we think are going on or happening, things that they may not be going on, we might experience, and that also varies with the types of substances we're abusing. Now, I'm not saying if you end up having a beer or a glass of wine before dinner, and then, it's 2 or 3 hours before you go off to play, and how that may affect your ability. Technically, by then, it should absorb into your stream. It should metabolize, and you should be able to move forward. When you start adding the factors in about different types of drugs and or narcotics, and that's the range that they kind of all sit in, because they are some sort of derivative, whether legal narcotics or not, or legal pain medicines or illicit drugs, whatever the case may be. Any of the substances we are introducing into our body that may chemically alter our state, which fundamentally changes the way we consent or not able to consent before we play, needs to be a considerable risk. Now, this would seem like a subject that seems to be fairly straightforward and fairly direct. The problem is with the introduction of some of these clubs now that I'm seeing in places like Europe and South America and a few other places, and I'm not specifically calling anyone directly out. And you're also, if the law allows you to do it, and that's your choice, that's fine. But just because it's legal to put something inside of your club, does that mean that we should be doing it? Now, what would be the problems here if we look at something like, let's just start with something baseline like alcohol, which I've addressed before. If we start using alcohol while we're playing, our inhibitions initially are going to lower. So we're going to be having warmth sensations. We might feel a little bit more relaxed. But what has the law specifically started to say to us in regards to our consent when we are under the influence of something? The law, right now I've read up about 20 or 30 countries at this point, looking at, what are their laws that surround consent. Now, the basics come back that once you are under the influence, you can't consent to certain activities. You can't. Now, we already have a problematic view from the rest of the world about our lifestyle and the subcultures within it, and how we deal with whether or not we are going to what we're doing, is it abusive or not? Now, if you add in the fact that we're now using alcohol to mask some of these things or to lower our inhibitions, we are withdrawing our rights to consent. So now we're elevating and taking a bigger risk. If we're playing and we're under the influence, so dominant and the sub maybe sit down, they're at the club, they have a couple glasses of wine or beer or shots of liquor or whatever the case may be, you're elevating the risk for harm against somebody. So how can you make sure that your impact on somebody was not harder than you intended it to be if you've been drinking and your judgment is clouded? So you might increase that, subsequently harming them, breaking a bone or breaking the skin that wasn't intentional or intended on in the first place. All of the things that end up happening that we allow and do, why do we allow and do and let these things happen? Well, we don't have a lot of control when we're under the influence. And of course, I'm also not saying that's an excuse. It's not an excuse, but if we're supposed to be able to remove away as much risk so we can be enjoyable and be safe and reduce our risk profile inside a lifestyle, why are we adding elements that increase it? And this is even before I get into the discussion about any illicit type substances or even over-the-counter or prescribed medications. If we get involved using alcohol, we are willingly saying, yes, I'm an adult and I can consent to drinking, but I'm now going to be throwing all of that judgment out the window because I'm going to drink and then we're going to play. Or I'm going to drink and I'm going to be the object of the play. So whether you're a submissive or a dominant. And this puts things in a precarious situation. I would imagine that for some of these clubs, you're elevating your risk profile for somebody getting hurt. It's not a question of if, it's just a question of when. So I'm not really certain if we're doing this now. And I'm not condoning it. If it's worked for you and it's something that helps your patrons relax, and the country I saw this in, the odd thing is in their specific country, and it's in Europe, Central Europe, the laws were very specific there. When I happened to end up reading the laws of that country, where you cannot, similar to the United States, and paraphrasing, of course, you can't consent when you're under the influence. So you're putting yourself in a precarious situation. Now, I don't know about litigious nature of, every European nation, if people are allowed to sue. I'm not saying the U.S. has got that right, but I think if you're taking the risk and also allowing your patrons to increase their risk for harm, you're partially responsible. I don't know, maybe the bars operate different from BDSM nights, but I did see, they were obviously over the course of 1 month that I looked at their activities calendar, every time they had a BDSM event, the bar was fully open. As a matter of fact, I never saw an event where the bar was closed. So maybe it is me being a little old school. Maybe it is me, potentially gatekeeping a subject that I think is kind of dangerous. I don't look at it that way. I look at it as pointing something out that's kind of, we're already doing things that are quite risky. Impact, stapling, extreme masochism, interrogation scenes, which are, heavily emotionally dependent, bodily, fluid exchange, needle play, all of these heavy things that require a lot of precision, that require us to be on our perfect game. If we even feel under the weather, that there is this whole, like when we check in, well, I'm not feeling 100% tonight. Okay, maybe I'm just going to sit this one out. And that's understandable. But now we're willfully adding an element that's altering our perception. And it seems to be quite dangerous when doing so. And it's the same thing like I had just mentioned before. I want to get into the medications aspect and then the illegal drugs. If you're under medication, and it obviously is dependent on the type of medication you're on. I realize that all medications are quite different, but have you made your partners aware so they understand the risk that you're playing with? Do you have a medication you're taking required that's going to alter your perception of the reality once you are under the influence of that medication? Is it medically required? Is it for mental health or emotional reasons you're taking medication? There are reasons we have to disclose certain things that we're doing. And if we don't seem to understand these things, we're placing people in potentially harm's way. And that's something that kind of boggles my mind, because I don't really understand why you would want to do things that are intentionally looking to potentially harm somebody. Whether you want to place yourself in harm's way or you want to put somebody in harm's way. Top or the bottom, submissive or the dominant. Now, when we get into the illegal drugs or substances that are, there is a plethora of them out there. I've never been one for drugs. I've never really taken drugs. I have tried pot once or twice. It's not really for me. I'm not against people who smoke pot. I've never been against that. But when we start getting into things like ecstasy or ketamine, bigger drugs, you run a bigger risk, I would have to assume, if we're extrapolating some of this, that your behavior is going to be fundamentally different. The things you feel are going to be fundamentally different. And you're willing to risk that for play. And not only are you subjecting yourself to that, you're subjecting your partner to that. And whether or not they've consented to play while you're under the influence of something. I guess it comes down to, I don't understand why anybody would subject themselves to that in the first place. It kind of tends to tell me that somebody's a little bit of a selfish person, that they're doing this for selfish means. That if you're saying you need these things to get into that headspace, you need to start addressing why you need some sort of substance to relax and feel calm to do these things. That you're not actually addressing the root problem, you're masking it. And by the way, alcohol is a depressant. So it's not actually going to make you feel better. It's going to make you feel worse, especially if you're holding on to any apprehension or stress. It's going to elevate that feeling. It's not going to alleviate it at all. You are opening the door to talking yourself into things that, well, you may have not really considered or thought about before. And that becomes another problematic nature. Now, there was a club that I was kind of watching as one of the scenes unfolded in Central Europe, where then a prominent member, I like to call them kink demonstrators, I think people call them kink leaders or kink educators. They're not really that. You have to remember, and this is going to be a very short diatribe on this, people who are demonstrating or discussing kink or anything like that of that nature, they're telling you the way they've experienced it, worked through their little minor hiccups here and there, what they've learned, what rules work for them, and then that's their best practice. That doesn't necessarily mean it's the only practice. So they're kink demonstrators, and I much more prefer that. But that notwithstanding, there was a kink demonstrator in this particular area in Europe and was using their position and photographing people while they were under the influence. Substance doesn't really matter. But they claimed they consented when it was happening, but then they couldn't consent afterwards. So this person decided to blur the lines and get involved with people who are under consent or under the influence, or worse, potentially got them to the point that they were under the influence, and then subsequently masked the lines of whether or not they could consent to an activity. Now, I'm not necessarily saying these were sexual activities, so this wasn't some sort of sexual assault or an attempt at one. But doing photographs, or probably, doing a tie when someone's not ready or not fully capable to understand how much pressure is being applied, this then disassociates themselves from the aspect of what they can consent to. And I think it boggles my mind that we want to place ourselves in these situations, that you're willing to you're willing to risk your physical health because you want to have that drink, or we're willing to risk ourselves to play with someone after they've had some sort of substance to feel better. Maybe the question needs to be, why do you need that substance to play? What makes it safer for you? How does that elevate the game? Now, I know there are a lot of people that do this, but I think we're missing out on the bigger picture when we talk about the lifestyle. We talk about consent, which that's another fun one that's just been flying all around again lately, is the word consent. If we're talking about consent in the lifestyle, well, then how is it that we're missing out on something such as this, and that we think that consent is somehow wrapped around it by doing, I don't know, having a drink or using some sort of medication before a scene, or taking some drugs before a scene? How is that going to allow us to make the best judgment for ourselves? It's not. None of this comes back to any positive experience. And for those people that sit there and boast that it's, really for them, makes their experience better, they have the best orgasm of their life, to that I would say you are the exception, you are not the rule. I'm not going to call you a straightforward liar, because I don't know those people, and maybe genuinely for them, they need some sort of substance to enhance their play. I then, as a partner, would be questioning that right away. What about you needing some sort of substance to get through a scene or a play to make yourself feel better or to elevate it? It's a really straightforward connection or question that you do need. I know it sounds like, I'm taking bigger positions on certain things, but I think where we need clarity, we need direction, we need to be responsible, where people who do this are removing the responsibility from one party or another, or both are subsequently removing a lot of responsibility from each other, because they're elevating their risk profile knowingly and intentionally. I know a lot of dungeons offhand. I can name about a good 15 that if you come in, they smell alcohol in your breath, or you look like you're under the influence, they're not going to let you in, because they don't want to subject themselves or their patrons or other members of that community to those antics, or possibly some potential risk that hasn't unfolded yet. And, if you're of age, that's fine. The argument's going to be, well, I'm old enough, I can drink or do what I want to do. You're right, you can. But once you move to a private location, those rights can be rescinded, because it's no longer your house or your home or your personal autonomy wherever you're at. I just look at people who do this, and that is the only question I have. Why would you subject yourself to doing this? And why would you raise that risk profile so high that something could end up happening? And there have been stories that I have read. I think we're just at a point now, as society keeps changing and we keep deeming more and more things acceptable, that this is becoming potentially one of the acceptable normalities of this. Oh, well, it's the hip and trendy thing to do. Let me have a glass or two of red wine, then I'll let you do some suspension on me. I can't imagine the potential risks that are involved if two people, a rigger and a rope bunny, were drinking, and the rigger begins their ties. You're going to miss out. You're going to miss out on something. And I would hate to be there for that mistake. And I think that's the problematic thing that we're not seeming to grasp. I don't know. Maybe, I don't think I'm being overprotective on this thought. I can go into the reasons why people need to drink, but that's not really what this is about today, or why they use, medications are quite obvious, or maybe why they're abusing that medication, or why they're abusing something that's more illegal or illicit. I can explain that behavior. But if it's none of those things for the most part, and you just want to get high in some form to play, then how much in reality are you there for the play, and it's about the play? Because if you need something to stimulate you into the play, you're talking about coercion. And that's not a healthy behavioral type or archetype either. So I'm really curious about what people have to say about, or their thoughts on maybe, using some sort of substances, whether you're talking about a glass of wine, a beer, or being under a doctor's orders and you have something like, some sort of opioid, or you're on some sort of steroid that you need, anything that could affect your mental judgment, or, talking about doing weed or ecstasy or something heavier before a scene. What are your thoughts on that? What's your takeaway on something like that? I really like to hear back, because I think that's a really good question that we need to start asking ourselves. For all the other things that we seem to hammer down inside of this lifestyle, we need to, at least in some communities, we need to stop using substances. Because at some point, one day, you're going to roll that dice and it's going to come up craps, and then you're not going to have a fallback plan once something happens. So let me know what you think in the comments below, or at least throw an answer here on the question I'm going to propose. If this is the first time you're listening to me, please like and subscribe. Rate the show 5 stars so other people can find this and I can keep the show free and moving forward. Really appreciate it. This has been a wonderful 3-year journey. This is the start of my 3rd year of journey doing this. But yeah, give me some feedback. Let me know what you think on this topic. Do I got it right? Do I got it wrong? And we'll see what the community's kind of response is when it comes to drinking and substance abuse pre-scene, or even maybe mid-scene, which is something else that I've seen occur. Like I said, let me know. And I'm very curious where the community is going to be at on this discussion. Until next time, everybody, be safe and stay tuned.